Not getting any that has you asking, is this it? Have you accomplished all you've set out to do in life and are not feeling as fulfilled as you thought you would? It is normal at midlife to reassess what's working for you and what's not. It's also normal to want to reclaim your time, your energy, and your joy. Let's make the best out of the second half of our lives by having more fun, experiencing more peace, and feeling more joy. If any of this resonates with you, then this podcast is for you. I'm Megan Bayless Bartley. Now let's get ready to shift our shit. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the SOS Podcast. I'm Megan Bayless Bartley, joined today with Elizabeth McCormack and Britt Riddle. Hello, ladies.
Hey, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yes, we're coming to you. This is our first episode in 2024. We are excited to be the anti-resolution podcast episode today. We have a fun episode about why resolutions just aren't working and kind of set us up for, a lose-lose situation. So we're still talking about boundaries. This is our 6th episode in season 3 on boundaries. And, this podcast, as you know in our intro, is really about reclaiming your time, your energy, and your joy. And oftentimes, as we're rounding into our 40s and 50s, we're reassessing what works for us and what doesn't work for us. What have we done for the last 40 years? What do we want to do for the next 40 years? And so the new year is a wonderful time where everybody says, wow, that last year just really kicked my ass. And now I want to try to do things differently. So Elizabeth, you had a great comment earlier about kind of assessing for the need for change. Tell us about your experience and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I went to a New Year's Day party yesterday, and a lot of the conversation was around resolutions and what's your resolution? And if you didn't have to go to work, how would you spend your time, your money, and all the things? And it really kind of triggers me of the I'm going to go get healthy and I'm going to not eat carbs, or I'm going to Whole30, or I'm going to intermittent fast. And I feel like all of those conversations are happening right now, but that's really the content. That's just the stuff we do, but it's not the stuff we believe about ourselves. And so I think if we're looking at how do you spend your time, what's your relationship to social media, what's your relationship to your friends, and you want to spend more time with your friends, have more joy, all of those things. If we're just making it as this situational kind of goal that's not foundationally set, I think we're just kind of spitting in the wind almost, trying to kind of make things feel a little better, but not really getting to the meat of what would make things feel better, because I'm aligning myself to what's really important in my life and having more meaningful conversations about that. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go meet my 50 new friends that are trying January out at Crunch or whatever it is, instead we kind of need to say, what is that commitment I have to myself? And how it fits in with the boundary piece is that these commitments we make to ourselves, that's a boundary we make for ourselves, and it's not anybody else's job to uphold that boundary for us. If I'm going to spend less time on social media, that's a one-on-one goal for me, and that is a boundary I'm making for myself. If I'm going to be a better mom or wife, or not get entangled into the same routine conflicts that don't get resolved at my house on a regular basis, then that's about, I'm going to say, I'm not going to fight with you anymore when your voice is raised. I'm going to hold that boundary. It's not the other person's job to make sure that they don't raise their voice. It's my job to follow through with what I'm going to say, which is I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to choose to take a time out and just institute that for myself. I'm feeling dysregulated by what's happening. There's a boundary that I'm putting with somebody that's in my house or at work. So there are lots of places to examine it.
Yeah. And the word you've used this season is setting limits, basically for yourself, of knowing what your limits are. And in those situations where we are having conversations where people are highly emotionally activated, we usually aren't going to be productive in those conversations. And so it is important for us to, if we don't want to participate in that highly emotional space and not get anywhere productive with the conversation, to remove ourselves and say, hey, I'm going to give you some time to calm down, and to, or, maybe calm down is the wrong word, because, people don't want to be told to calm down, but some space to feel your feelings. And when you feel like you're ready to have a calm discussion about this, I'm happy to do that with you.
And I think that's true. Even in I've had numerous people kind of say to me, even my spouse has said, I'm worried about 2024. It's an election year. I'm worried about what is going to be the conversation. How is that going to influence how I feel about this year? And how am I going to put in boundaries to protect myself from the discourse that may take place during an election year, and the advertisements we'll see and the things we'll hear, whether that's on the news or it's on TikTok or it's on Instagram, or the jokes even that are made that we then see out of memes and all of these different things that we're all consuming all the time. And so how do we say, I don't want to worry about this. Worrying has never gotten me anywhere. And so if I'm not going to worry about it, it means I can't be continually consuming it and talking about it with my friends. Yes, we want to have really intelligent political dialogue and have people that we go and have these tough conversations with. But if we're just talking about the fervor of the whole situation, we're not actually having good political dialogue. We're just talking about the content. We're not talking about the foundation again.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's so important, the content versus kind of the foundation or the process of things. And for me, that conversation, I think I've said this in every episode I've been in, has come back to the boundaries around my energy. And sometimes I have a lot of capacity to engage in that. Sometimes I really enjoy that. And other times I simply don't, and I will just feel dysregulated, which again gets us nowhere. But I was thinking, Elizabeth, in terms of, even I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and they were talking about their emails and how they try to set boundaries around their emails, but people still email them after hours. And so I was talking with them about how, because I've definitely been in that mindset too, of gosh, why do these people email me, text me late at night? But then it's my job to not respond, to set up those boundaries around my own time and energy, that I get to choose when I respond to a text, when I respond to an email. And I think our society tells us differently. Texts get responded to immediately, and emails have maybe 24 hours. But setting boundaries, whether it's personal life, professional life, around our energy and our time, and that we do that for ourselves. Other people are going to do and behave in any way they want to. And for a lot of people, it's just what comes to their mind when it comes to their mind, and they're thinking about it, and that's fine.
Right.
But it's my job to set my own boundaries.
Yes. And the more we honor our own boundaries, we are inviting other people, one, to set and honor their own boundaries, but also it's a form of truth telling. It's a form of being honest with other people, to say, hey, I really can't do that thing today. I really am not feeling up to it, and you're not going to enjoy my presence if I'm there, or whatever the thing might be. Or the fact you don't respond to the text at 10 p.m. at night because you don't need to. Even if you saw the text, it's not, you have to set the boundaries for yourself so that you are best taking care of yourself, because you're an adult person who can do that. And you're trusting that other people can take care of themselves and be okay with not receiving a response sooner than 24 hours. Right. And sometimes I think we worry, we have that anxiety of oh my gosh, I need to soothe the other person so that they're not mad at me if I don't respond right away, even though I saw it or whatever. And it's yeah, I saw it. I needed to just turn my brain off and respond to you in the morning. Right.
Yeah. Something I've been working on in my own mind is reframing that as respecting the other person's autonomy and independence, that they can manage their own anxiety, and I don't have to do that for them.
Yes. Yes, because if we feel like we have to and we do it, people are going to start relying on us to continue to do that. And the reality is we need to trust that they can be their best adult selves and take care of themselves most appropriately. And if they can't, we figure it out afterwards, and hopefully the thing I like about this conversation is it's the idea that you're taking responsibility for your own actions and thoughts and beliefs and words, right? It's not about putting shit on other people and saying, I don't want to hear your political discussion. It's saying, I'm going to limit the amount of time I spend on social media so that I'm not surrounding myself around the, political discussion or whatever it is, instead of pointing the finger and saying, you need to do things differently. It's more about looking at ourselves and saying, what is it about me that this is, what's it bringing up? And what do I need to do to best take care of myself?
Well, and in that process, we have to let go of how they're taking care of themselves and really focus on our own stuff to say, like, I'm not going to police what you say. You're in charge of what you're going to say. I'm going to police what I hear or how I protect myself, whether that's I'm really good at changing the subject or redirecting, or we can use, reframing in our therapeutic language. Like, there's all these different ways to say, there's a few things that really, trigger me, and I'm going to know what my triggers are. I'm going to know how to get out of those situations if I can. I'm going to know my skill set for coping with those things. And so if we know that 2024 has lots of different places where this may be the case for us, whether that's a significant change in the workforce, and maybe it's a significant change at home, those kinds of things mean, okay, at my house, I've got a senior in high school. I've mentioned him several times. The question that comes to him on a daily basis is, where are you going to college? How is that working? Well, making that decision isn't as easy as it used to be. It now is much more complex. He does not know on January 2nd where he's going to college. Does he have some top choices? Absolutely. Does he have, the dream? He sure does. But he's also making this decision in a really healthy way of saying, I need to balance out all of my decisions and not take on other people's pressure of me to give them an answer, but to say, I'm trying to weigh out the financial situation. And for all the parents that are in this world right now, the FAFSA has not been released. Nobody's talking about the money for next year yet. And so everybody's in this anxious space when you have all of this to kind of figure out that's outside your control. So everybody's got their thing, whatever their thing is. And it's like, okay, how much can he talk about this decision that has to be made? How much can he protect himself? Like, oh, not gonna make that decision until May. Tell you then, that kind of thing, to kind of put in your boundary to say, nope, I'm prepared. I know that trigger thing is going to be said to me over and over and over again. And here's my answer, and I'm done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Elizabeth, you said something that reminded me, that word control, of discerning what is within our control and what is not within our control. And I think that's so important when it comes to thinking about boundaries, that there are things that I can control, and those are the things within me only. And then there are those things that I cannot control or don't want to control. And that's where our boundaries are framed.
Well, and a nice level ground. I know sometimes, we get sparked, or, we get an emotional sort of like rush of like, oh, I don't like that, or, oh, that triggers me, or, oh, and you don't have to follow that feeling down the rabbit hole and let it spiral out of control. You can feel it and notice it and name it and just say, okay, maybe I count to 5. Maybe I, just, oh, whoa, the thing that I love doing, and I know I say this a lot, but I like to get curious, like when that feeling happens, or if I'm pulled by, interesting conversations, I want to know from the other people that don't think the way I think, like, tell me how that makes sense to you. Tell me how you got to that. Because I really genuinely want to know. I mean, part of me, I guess, because I'm curious about how people's minds work and how their hearts work. And like, just like, how do people believe what they believe or get to, a conclusion for themselves. And so I really genuinely am curious. And that curiosity kind of is this like leveling ground, is like, I'm not judging them. And, I'm not in a place where I'm saying I'm agreeing with them. I'm just sort of like, tell me more about you. In a way, it's me inviting them to be a truth teller, right? To be honest with me. And hopefully I'm a safe space for them to be honest with. But that curiosity always, like, if I can get to that place where I'm not super like triggered by it. And Elizabeth's smiling at me right now on video. So
I know, I'm laughing my head off, and that's so not fair. But in the back of my mind, I remember Megan coming to my house, and my kids are teenagers, and so we're all sitting at the table. And I don't remember, like, I don't know where your kids were, Megan, but Megan's like, so tell me how it is you believe. And I don't know if it was Jesus or like asking them about their Christian belief of how they believe. And my kids are immediately like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me, lady? Like, we already get this whole, message of being pastors' kids or whatever. And they both just are like, I don't even know how to have this conversation. And Megan just like throws this huge bomb out, across my dining room table or whatever. And it just creates this like laugh. But at the same time, it is still this perspective of like being curious about people's faith and being curious about their inner life and finding the vocabulary to describe or explain that is hard work. It's really hard to do. It's vulnerable. It's really tough to like say, here's what I actually think. And that leaves me room to follow-up questions. It leaves me room for somebody to disagree with me. And those are not spaces that we really open ourselves up to very often. And so, sorry, Megan, you're funny. It just made me laugh.
I remember that conversation very vividly. And I think part of it is because I really do view your family like my own family, where like I would have those conversations with my own kids. I'm just like, let's just throw this out there and see where this lands, And I mean, so there's a piece of that where maybe I, should have known, like, don't ask these big questions to these pastor kids, or I also kind of, I like with you guys too, you and your husband, I like to shake shit up a little bit. So it's sort of like, okay, pastor kids and, pastor dad, like, how do we talk about this at the dinner table, And I'm curious, like, I'm honestly curious about it.
And I think that genuinely comes off. Like it genuinely comes off as like, okay, how do we have a regular conversation about something that's really hard to have conversations about that people don't talk about?
Right. And you would also know that I'd be okay if you all said like, dude, Megan, totally not a good question. Like we're just trying to have dinner right now, And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, yes, let's just have dinner and talk about Pokemon or I don't know, like swimming or something very innocuous,
Yeah, but these things really do happen. I had a theology professor years ago. I'm sitting at a little kids table that was maybe 3 feet off the ground. Like it's a tiny little table with tiny little chairs. And I'm a very tall person. So my knees are practically at my ears while I'm sitting at this little kids table. And the guy comes over and he just says, Elizabeth, tell me your thoughts on predestination. And I was like, tell me your thoughts on keeping the icing out of the carpet underneath this table, David. How are we going to do that? It was just so like blow you over of like, oh, you're not tracking with what's happening around us. Okay, I'm going to have to make a decision about how I enter into this conversation, whether that's to redirect or to say, yeah, you're a theology professor. Maybe predestination's for another day.
Yes.
Great.
Well, it's interesting too, because when you find people who can have deep conversations or very meaningful or thought-provoking, sometimes it is like this thing where you're just like, oh my gosh, this person, they've studied this thing too, and they know these, words, and I want to just have that because it kind of feeds, for me, it like feeds my soul, right? Like it's something that it speaks to who I am. And so it gets me all excited when I'm around people who can do that with me.
For sure.
Britt, you've been quiet. You tell us what you.
I'm just watching your all's family interactions over here.
Yes. Yeah, it's been fun. Like I don't know. I think about for one question I usually think through at the beginning of the year, and we're gonna wrap this up and move on to the next part of this episode is, when you think about where you want to be at the end of this year, on December 31st, 2024, how do you, and I think of it in feeling terms. I've really been thinking about this a lot lately about how, for me, it's about how does it feel? Like, we recently had to redo a bunch of plumbing in our house and had to, retile and redecorate a bathroom or two. And I didn't really have a visual about what it would look like. I had a feeling about what it would feel like to be in that room. And it sort of transformed as it needed to, but like being in that room now, I'm like, oh, this feels exactly how I wanted it to feel. So some people might think about things, some people might feel the things, right? Like how we process this. But I'm curious for everybody to, just kind of sit with that question of like, what would you want the end of 2024 to feel like differently, perhaps, than what you're feeling right now? So take a moment to think about that. We'll be back with part 2 of episode 6.